In Matthew's book, Jesus said, go into all the land, take the word, share it, teach it, preach to every man. Just do it. Hello, this is Dr. Gregg Mays with your Word Wednesday. You know, if you've been around me for any length of time, you probably know my favorite kind of go-to verse in the Bible, and that is Proverbs 3:5. And sometimes I add and 6. And that is, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. 6 goes on to say, in all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. And it is that verse, that kind of knowledge of that verse that brought me to kind of this thought that anguish, that I anguish over. And here it is. Being an American, a U.S. citizen, sometimes hinders our Christian growth. Now notice, I didn't say hinders our faith. In other words, being an American, we are afforded the opportunity to share our faith, to grow in our faith, to practice our faith, to read our Bibles every day. We can read our Bibles in public. We can read our Bibles in practice. We can in private. We can talk to anyone we want to within reason. There are certain times we're not allowed to bring up our faith. I'm a high school teacher and I don't sit in the room and say, let me tell you about Jesus Christ, because that's not an appropriate place. If someone comes to ask me a question, that's different. So that's the backdrop. I'm saying that being an American citizen sometimes hinders our Christian growth. Now, I read a book not too long ago, and it's called The Insanity of God by Nick Ripken. I actually referenced it on a podcast, one of my chats with Dr. Gregg Mays on Apple Podcasts, shameless plug, and Spotify, again, shameless plug, the Agape Leaders podcast. But I talked about this book. I encourage you to read The Insanity of God by Nick Ripken. The reason why I say this is it will change your perspective on being an American Christian. Check this out. Towards the end of the book, now I've read pretty much almost the entire book by the time I got to this point, so I really could grasp and understand where this woman was coming from. And I'll try to read some and paraphrase some. So there's a young lady, her name is Samira, and she comes to spend time with Nick and Ruth. He and his wife, they had been on the road visiting all these places. And so now she is coming to spend a little bit of time with them. And so they go to this church, and it's a small church. They call it in Central Kentucky. It's a moderate sized church, not small, maybe not small, not too big. But they're doing public baptisms. We do baptisms all the time. But this young lady, Samira, she says that she's looking at the Nick says, I couldn't help smiling as I turned my eyes back toward the baptismal at the front of the church. A few seconds later, I noticed Samira glancing around the congregation, looking confused and a little troubled. When she caught my eye, she leaned toward me. Why aren't all the people standing? Nick said, what do you mean? She said, why aren't all these people standing and cheering and clapping at such a miracle from God? And she goes on to explain that the fact that these people were being baptized publicly, that nobody was coming to take them to jail, they were not going to be hurt or punished, they were just going to be allowed to be baptized. She called that a miracle. When's the last time you sat in a baptism ceremony and you considered it a miracle? I know that I haven't. I take it for granted. And see, here's the thing. when you don't appreciate that baptism that you just watched here in the United States, when you don't recognize that is a miracle, that is not a requirement, then you, like me, can take our faith for granted, and it can hinder our growth because we don't appreciate the miracle we just saw. And so we're always looking for miracles. And here in America, we don't understand that there's a miracle almost at every turn. You know, as I film these Word Wednesdays, and I know some of you are listening on a podcast, but yes, this also is shown on our YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram. As I film this, right straight across from me is a bookshelf. And on that bookshelf is no less than 10 or 15 Bibles. And I've shared this before. There are places around the country, around the world, that those Christians can barely have one Bible to split among, 100 followers of Christ. And we take that for granted. And when you begin to take things for granted, then you don't grow like you should. My prayer for you is to trust God and don't lean on your own understanding. And what do I mean by that? Don't take what you have for granted. Open your eyes so that you can see the miracle that God has placed around you, and so that you can act accordingly. What do I mean by that? Open your Bible. Notice how people responded when Jesus and the disciples and the people in the Bible, God did miracles through them. When that happened, they were jumping and praising God. Do we do that because we have access to as many Bibles as we need? Do we do that when we sit and we watch a baptism? Do we do that when we go to church on Sunday and on Wednesday? Do we do that when we sit and we watch here on social media and across podcast platforms where we can just listen to as much word as we want, and we don't have to worry about somebody coming and arresting us and putting us in jail? Do we appreciate the miracle that we have, that we can share the gospel without hindrance, without worrying about being put in jail? And yet we don't. This is what I mean when I say that sometimes being an American, a U.S. citizen, can hinder our Christian growth. Won't you push yourself out of that bed, out of that bondage? I don't really mean bed. Bondage is what I really wanted to say, where you're just so focused on, I can do it anytime. And won't you treat it like the miracle that it is, and share without worrying about having to go to jail? That's what we get to do here. So let's do that. Hey, I pray that this is a blessing for you. And remember, stay strong. So what you waiting for? Someone to feel the pain some more? Cause you ain't share the love, the grace you found within the Father's care. To share the love of God is more than just a simple job. It's Christ speaking the off a Holy Spirit law. Share it.